It was one evening. A retainer was waiting under the large gate called Rashomon for the rain to stop. There was no one else under the wide gate except this man. Only a cricket was perched on a large round pillar with patches of red paint peeling off here and there. If the Rashomon gate was located on a major street in the town, there should have been at least 2 or 3 other people wearing hats or hoods to shelter from the rain. But there was no one else. The reason was that over the past 2 or 3 years, Kyoto had been hit by a series of disasters, including a major earthquake, strong winds, fires, and food shortages. As a result, the town had become very desolate. According to old records, people broke Buddha statues and temple utensils, painted them with red paint, and attached thin plates of gold and silver to them, then piled them up on the side of the road to sell as firewood. The town was in such a terrible state that no one bothered to repair the Rashomon gate. Eventually, the gate was left untended, and foxes and raccoon dogs made their homes there, while thieves hid in its shadows. Finally, the bodies of those who died without anyone to claim them were brought to the gate and abandoned there. As a result, no one dared to approach the gate after dark, for it was an eerie place. Instead, crows began to gather there in large numbers. During the day, you could see several crows flying in circles above the roof, cawing loudly. Especially in the evening, when the sky turned red, the black crows looked like a swarm of sesame seeds. Of course, the crows had come to eat the bodies of the deceased left on the gate. However, today, perhaps because it was late, there wasn't a single crow. Only white crow droppings dotted the crumbling stone steps overgrown with grass. The man was sitting at the top of the 7-step stone staircase, wearing a washed-out indigo-colored kimono. He was staring blankly at the rain, fiddling with a large pimple on his right cheek. Earlier, I wrote that the man was waiting for the rain to stop. But even if the rain stopped, he had no plans to do anything. Normally, he would have returned to his master's house. However, his master had fired him 4 or 5 days earlier. As I wrote earlier, Kyoto was very desolate at that time. The man had lost his job because of the town's desolation. Therefore, it would be more accurate to say that he was stuck in the rain with nowhere to go rather than waiting for the rain to stop. Moreover, the appearance of the sky today was also weighing heavily on the man's mind. The rain, which had started around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, showed no signs of stopping. The man was thinking about what he would do for tomorrow's meal. While trying to figure out a way to deal with something he couldn't change, he kept listening to the sound of the rain. The rain enveloped the Rashomon gate, gathering the sound of pattering from afar. The evening darkness grew deeper, and when he looked up, the eaves of the roof seemed to be supporting heavy, dark clouds. There was no time to choose a method to deal with something that couldn't be helped. If he chose a method, he would have no choice but to die on the side of the road when he ran out of food. If that happened, he would be left on top of the gate and abandoned like a dog. But if I didn't choose a method, the man's thoughts circled around the same place over and over again, finally arriving at this conclusion. However, the feeling of if I do that remained just that. The man thought, I have no choice but to use any means necessary, but he still didn't have the courage to clearly decide that I have no choice but to become a thief. The man sneezed loudly. Then he stood up, looking annoyed. By evening, the streets of Kyoto had grown so cold that one could almost feel the need for a brazier. The wind blew freely through the space between the gateposts, carrying with it the cold, dark air. The cricket that had been perched on the pillar had also flown away. The man hunched his shoulders, pulled his kimono collar higher, and looked around the gate. He thought that if he could find a place where he could shelter from the rain and wind and no one would see him, he would sleep there for the night. Just then, he noticed a wide red ladder leading up to the gate. If he went up there, he would find nothing but corpses. The man placed his straw-shod feet on the bottom rung of the ladder, taking care not to let the sword at his waist slip out. Some time passed. In the middle of the wide ladder leading up to the top of the gate, a man crouched like a cat, holding his breath and peering upward. The light from a fire above cast a faint glow on the man's right cheek. Among his short beard, there was a large red pimple. At first, the man thought there were only corpses up there. However, when he climbed 2 or 3 steps of the ladder, he saw that someone was lighting a fire above and moving it around. The yellowish light from the fire reflected on the cobwebs on the ceiling, and he realized what it was. It was no ordinary person who was lighting a fire on top of the Rashomon gate on a rainy night like this. The man climbed up the steep ladder as quietly as a lizard and reached the top. Then he flattened his body as much as possible, stretched his neck forward, and peered inside cautiously. Inside, as he had heard in rumors, there were several corpses lying haphazardly. However, the light from the fire was narrower than he had expected, so he couldn't tell exactly how many there were. All he could make out vaguely were naked corpses and corpses dressed in kimonos mixed together. There seemed to be both men and women. The corpses lay silently, their mouths open and their arms outstretched, like clay dolls. The light from the fire fell on their shoulders and chests, casting the lower parts in shadow. The corpses were silent, as if they would never speak again. The man covered his nose against the stench of decay. But he soon forgot about the smell. A strong feeling welled up inside him, and he could no longer smell anything. At that moment, the man noticed a person crouching among the corpses. It was an old woman with white hair, wearing a cypress-colored kimono. She held a burning pine branch in her right hand and stared intently at the face of one of the corpses. The long hair suggested that the corpse was a woman. The man was so frightened and curious that he forgot to breathe. He felt a chill run down his spine. The old woman inserted the pine branch into a crack in the floor and placed both hands on the neck of the corpse she had been staring at. Then, like a monkey plucking the hair of a child, she began to pull out the long hair one strand at a time. The hair came out easily. As he watched each strand being pulled out, the man's fear gradually faded away. In its place, a strong anger toward the old woman began to rise within him. No, it wasn't just toward the old woman. A hatred for all humans who do evil grew stronger and stronger. If someone had asked the man at that moment, "Would you rather starve to death or become a thief?" he would have answered without hesitation, "I'd rather starve to death." That's how filled with hatred for evil the man's heart had become. The man did not understand why the old woman was pulling out the dead man's hair. Therefore, he could not judge whether her actions were truly wrong or not. But to him, the act of pulling out the hair of a dead person on this rainy night was something he could not forgive. Of course, he had completely forgotten about his earlier thoughts of becoming a thief. So the man gathered his strength in his legs and leaped up from the ladder into the building. He grabbed his sword and walked toward the old woman with heavy steps. Needless to say, the old woman was startled. As soon as she saw the man, she jumped up as if she had been shot with an arrow. "Where are you going?" The man blocked the old woman's path as she tried to escape, stumbling over the corpse, and shouted at her. The old woman tried to push him away and escape. The man pushed her back again. The two struggled silently for a moment between the corpses. But the outcome was decided from the start. The man finally grabbed the old woman's arm and forced her to the ground. Her arms were as thin as chicken legs, nothing but skin and bones. "What were you doing? Speak. If you don't, this is what happens." The man pushed the old woman away, suddenly drew his sword from its sheath, and thrust the white blade in front of her face. But the old woman said nothing. Her hands trembled, she breathed heavily through her shoulders, and she stared silently with wide eyes. Her eyes seemed as if they would pop out at any moment. Seeing this, the man realized for the first time that the old woman's life or death was entirely in his hands. This realization extinguished the intense anger that had been burning within him. All that remained was the quiet satisfaction and pride of having accomplished a single task. Looking down at the old woman, the man softened his voice slightly and said, "I am not a member of the police. I am just a traveler who happened to pass by this gate. I have no intention of tying you up. All I want is for you to tell me what you were doing here at this hour." The old woman stared at the man's face with wide eyes. Her eyes shone sharply, like those of a bird ready to pounce on its prey. After a moment, she moved her wrinkled mouth, which had almost merged with her nose, as if chewing something. Her thin neck revealed a sharp Adam's apple moving up and down. Then, a hoarse voice, like the cawing of a crow, emerged from her throat with difficulty. "I wanted to pull out this hair. I wanted to pull out this hair and make a wig." The man was slightly disappointed that the old woman's answer was more ordinary than he had expected. At the same time, the cold, contemptuous feeling he had felt earlier returned to his heart. It must have shown on his face. The old woman, still holding the long hair she had pulled from the corpse in one hand, muttered in a hoarse voice, "I see. Pulling hair from the dead may be a bad thing. But these dead people were all people who deserved it. This woman, for example, used to cut snakes into 4 pieces, dry them, and sell them to samurai as dried fish. If she hadn't died of illness, she would still be selling them today. I heard that her dried fish was delicious, and the samurai always bought it. I don't think what this woman did was wrong. If she hadn't done it, she would have starved to death. So I don't think what I'm doing is wrong either. If I don't do it, I'll starve to death. I'm sure this woman would forgive me for what I'm doing." The old woman said something like this. The man put his sword back in its sheath. He held the hilt with his left hand and listened to the old woman's story with a cold expression. Of course, with his right hand, he was slowly thinking while worrying about the pimple on his cheek. However, as he listened to the story, a new courage arose in the man's heart. It was the courage he couldn't muster under the gate earlier, and it was completely opposite to the courage he had when he caught the old woman in this building earlier. The man was no longer torn between starving to death or becoming a thief. At that moment, the thought of starving to death had been pushed out of his consciousness. "I see," he said in a slightly mocking tone when the old woman finished speaking. Then, taking a step forward, he suddenly removed his right hand from his cheek and grabbed the old woman's collar. He spoke as if biting her. "Then, do not blame me if I strip you naked. I too will starve to death if I do not." The man swiftly tore off the old woman's kimono with all his strength. Then, he roughly kicked her down onto the corpse as she tried to cling to his legs. The entrance to the ladder was only about 5 steps away. The man clutched the stripped kimono, which was the color of cedar bark, under his arm and quickly descended the steep ladder into the darkness of the night. After lying motionless for a while, the old woman rose from among the corpses, her naked body exposed. She groaned and crawled toward the entrance of the ladder, relying on the faint glow of the still burning pine fire. She peered through the gate, her short white hair hanging down behind her. Outside, there was nothing but the deep, black night. No one knew where the man had gone. Long ago, in a place called Longxi in China, there lived a man named Li Zeng. Li Zeng was very intelligent and possessed outstanding talents. During the late years of the Tebano era, despite his youth, he passed the highly difficult national examination, the imperial examination. His name was written on a large sheet of paper listing the names of those who had passed. He was then selected to serve as an official in the Jianghan region. His duties involved managing military affairs and prisons. However, Li Zeng was very proud, stubborn, and unable to get along well with others. Therefore, he was dissatisfied with his position as a low-ranking official. After some time, Li Zeng resigned from his post and returned to his hometown to live in seclusion. He spent his days writing Han poetry, a form of difficult poetry, without interacting with others. Li Zeng believed that rather than becoming a boring official and being exploited by his superiors, he would rather write wonderful poems and have his name remembered for 100 years after his death. However, becoming a famous poet was not easy. His life grew increasingly difficult. Li Zeng became increasingly desperate and anxious. His face grew stern, his cheeks became gaunt, and his bones began to protrude. Only his eyes shone brightly. When he passed the exam in his youth, he had a plump, handsome face, but now there was no trace of that left. After several years, Li Zeng could no longer endure the poverty. He had a wife and children at home. Finally, he gave up and returned to the eastern capital. There, he secured a position as a minor official in a local government. This was because he had half given up on living as a poet. His friends who had passed the exam with him were now in high positions. Even those he had once thought of as good-for-nothings had become important people. He had to obey their orders. This was very painful for Li Zeng, who had a high sense of pride. His mood grew dark, and he could no longer find joy in anything. His stubborn nature grew stronger and stronger. A year later, Li Zeng set out on a business trip. One night, he stayed near the Jusu River. That night, Li Zeng finally lost his mind. He suddenly woke up in the middle of the night, his face pale, and jumped out of bed. He then shouted loudly and ran out of the house. He kept running into the darkness. Li Zeng never returned. His family searched the nearby mountains and fields, but found no trace of him. No one knew what had happened to Li Zeng. The following year, Yuan, a man living in Chen County, was on his way to the southern kingdom by order of the king. Yuan had been a friend of Li Zeng who had passed the same examination as him. The two had been very close. One day, Yuan stayed overnight in a place called Shangyuo. The next morning, as he was about to depart while it was still dark, a villager said, "There is a man-eating tiger ahead. It's dangerous to go out so early in the morning, so you should wait until it gets lighter." However, Yuan had many retainers with him, so he didn't worry and set off. As he made his way through the forest path by the light of the moon, a tiger suddenly leaped out of the grass. The tiger seemed ready to pounce, but suddenly turned around and disappeared back into the grass. At that moment, a human voice came from the grass. "That was a close call, that was a close call." Yuan was startled. But he recognized the voice. That voice, could it be Li Zeng? There was no reply for a moment. Only the sound of someone crying could be heard. Eventually, a low voice answered, "As you might have guessed, I am Li Zeng from Longxi." Yuan forgot his fear and dismounted from his horse. Approaching the grassy area, he called out with a sense of nostalgia, "Why won't you come out of the grass?" Li Zeng replied, "I am not in human form at the moment. It would be shameful to show myself like this before my old friend. Besides, if you saw me, you would surely be afraid. But I'm truly happy to have met you like this. Please let me speak with you as the Li Zeng of old, even if only for a moment." Yuan heard Li Zeng's words from the grass and found them very strange. But at that moment, he felt little wonder, only sadness at having met his old friend. Yuan told his attendants to stop the group. He stood by the grassy area and talked with Li Zeng, who could only speak. They first talked about the capital and how their old friends were doing now. Yuan also told him about his current work, and Li Zeng praised him, saying, "You've become quite accomplished." Then Yuan finally asked, "Why did you become like this?" Li Zeng began speaking in a low voice. It was about a year ago. While traveling, I woke up in the middle of the night and heard someone calling my name. Drawn by the voice, I went outside, and someone kept calling me. Before I knew it, I was running through the mountains, using my hands to push myself forward. I felt an incredible strength surging through my body, and I was leaping over rocks. After a while, I noticed that hair was growing on my hands and elbows. When the night began to grow lighter, I saw my reflection in the river and was terrified. I was no longer human, I had become a tiger. At first, I thought it was a dream. But when I realized it wasn't a dream, I couldn't think of anything else but fear. I didn't know why this had happened. There was no reason for it. I thought about dying. But then, a rabbit ran past me. The next moment, I chased after the rabbit and, before I knew it, I was eating it with a mouth covered in blood. That was my first act as a tiger. Since then, every day, there is a brief moment when my human mind returns. During that time, I can speak and think just as I did when I was human. But gradually, that time is growing shorter. In the past, I used to wonder, why did I become a tiger? But the other day, I suddenly thought, why was I human in the first place? This is very terrifying. If this continues, the human heart within me will disappear. And I will become a true tiger, unable to recognize you, and end up eating you. Li Zeng continued his story. But I think that by then, my heart will be gone, so that will probably be the easiest way. But right now, there's still a little bit of human heart left, and that's what scares me the most. The thought of forgetting what it was like to be human is so sad I can't stand it. I think only someone who's experienced the same thing could understand this feeling. Li Zeng paused for a moment before speaking again. So I have a request. I always wanted to be a poet. But that dream never came true, and now I'm in this form. I wrote many poems before, but I don't know where they are anymore. But I still remember dozens of them. I want you to write them down and keep them for me. I want to leave behind some proof that I lived. That's the only thing I can't let go of. Yuan took Li Zheng's feelings to heart. He ordered his servant to write down each poem Li Zeng recited in the grass. Li Zeng read the poems aloud in a loud voice. He recited about 30 poems, some short and some long. Each one was splendid, clearly the work of a master. But Yuan thought to himself, these are indeed wonderful poems. But there is something just a little off about them. When Li Zeng finished reciting his poems, he suddenly began speaking in a voice that seemed to mock himself. It's embarrassing, but I still sometimes have a dream. I dream that my poetry collection is placed on the desks of distinguished people in the capital. I see it while lying in a hole. Even as a tiger, I still think about such things. How pathetic, don't you think? Yuan-san recalled the days when the old Li Zeng used to tease him, and he felt very sad. Li Zeng continued his story. Then, as a final act, I'll express my current feelings in a poem. I want you to hear this and know that my heart is still human. Yuan told his servant to write it down again. Li Zeng paused for a moment before beginning to recite the poem in a low voice. Without any warning, a calamity came upon me, turning me into a beast. Now that I cannot escape, sharp fangs and claws have grown, and no one can defeat me. But when I was human, many people praised me. Now I am hiding in the grass, while you have risen to prominence. Tonight, instead of singing a poem to the mountains and the moon, I can only howl. When Li Zeng finished reciting the poem, his voice fell silent for a moment. At that moment, the sky began to grow gradually brighter, and a cold wind blew through the trees. It was clear that night was nearing its end. Yuan and the others stood there in silence, their hearts heavy. Li Zheng's voice sounded again, softly. Earlier, I said I didn't know why I had become this way, but upon reflection, I can think of a reason. When I was human, I avoided interacting with others. People around me called me arrogant or unapproachable. But in truth, I was ashamed of myself. I was constantly anxious about whether I truly had any talent. So I refused to study or help others. Yet I couldn't find satisfaction in an ordinary life either. Li Zhang continued, deep down, I was always terrified of the thought, what if I have no talent? So I couldn't bring myself to study hard for the rest of my life. But half of me believed that I did have talent, so I couldn't live an ordinary life like everyone else either. As a result, I gradually stopped interacting with people, and every day I was filled with anxiety and shame. Because of that, the arrogant feelings inside me grew stronger and stronger. I remember something someone said long ago. Everyone has a wild beast inside them. That beast is their personality. In my case, this arrogant but actually cowardly heart was my wild beast. That beast ruined me. It made my family suffer and hurt my friends. Eventually, not just my heart but my body too became a real beast. Li Zhang remained silent for a moment, then spoke again. Looking back now, I wasted all my talent. I used to say, life is too long to do nothing, but too short to do something, but I never took action. The fear of failure and the laziness destroyed me. Even with little talent, someone who had polished it diligently could have become a great poet. Now, as a tiger, I've finally realized that. Li Zhang took a deep breath. I can't go back to being human. Even if I come up with a wonderful poem, I can't share it with anyone. Worse yet, my heart is slowly turning into that of a tiger. Li Zhang spoke with a trembling voice. What should I do? What about the past I wasted? This feeling is unbearable. That's why I run up the mountain and howl at the moon. I want someone to understand. But the beasts only cower in fear, and the mountains, trees, and moon probably think I'm just angry. But I'm so sad, I can't stand it. My fur is wet from the night dew, but that's not all. I'm crying. The sky gradually grew brighter. The mournful sound of a horn announcing dawn echoed from somewhere in the distance. Li Zhang said finally, we must part now. I will soon return to the heart of a tiger. But I have one request. Please tell my wife and children that I have died. Please do not speak of today's events. And if you could help those people so they do not suffer on the road in the future, I would be grateful. Li Zhang's voice trembled with tears. Actually, this was the request I should have made first. If I were still human, but I was only thinking about myself. I was consumed by the thought of whether my poems would survive. That's why I've become this beast. Li Zhang's voice had a bitter tone, as if mocking himself. There's one more request. When you finish your journey and return, please do not pass this way again. By then, I will have lost my human heart and will not recognize you as a friend. I might end up hurting you. Li Zhang continued, and one more thing, just 100 steps away from this path, there's a small hill. When you get there, please look back at me one more time. I'll show you my current form. It's not because I want to show you my strength. I want you to see this ugly form and not think, I want to see him again. Yuan's heart was filled with emotion. He quietly mounted his horse and said to the grassy field, I understand. I will do everything as you say. I will make sure to tell your wife and children. From within the grass, Li Zhang's sobbing could be heard. Thank you. Yuan's eyes were also filled with tears. He could not bring himself to speak. Yuan turned back toward the grass multiple times before slowly beginning to walk away. Yuan and the others parted ways with Li Zhang and began walking. After walking for a while, they reached the top of the hill. Yuan stopped the horse as instructed and turned around. He stared intently at the grassy area where Li Zheng had been. Then, a large shadow emerged from between the grass. It was a tiger. It must have been Li Zheng. The tiger slowly stepped onto the path and looked up at the pale morning moon. Gao! It roared twice in a loud voice. The sound was filled with sorrow and pain. Then the tiger spun around and leaped back into the grassy area. It never showed itself again. Yuan remained on the hilltop for a while, his chest tightening with sorrow. Tears trickled down his cheeks. Li Zheng, you were truly a sad man, he murmured, then gently urged his horse forward, slowly making his way along the path as the eastern sky began to brighten. One day, Buddha was walking slowly by himself along the edge of a lotus pond in the Pure Land. The white lotus flowers blooming in the pond were as beautiful as jewels, and an indescribably wonderful fragrance emanated continuously from the golden stamens at their centers. It must have been early morning in the Pure Land. Eventually, Buddha stopped at the edge of the pond and peered through the lotus leaves at the surface of the water. Beneath the lotus pond of the Pure Land lay the world of hell, and through the crystal clear water, the landscapes of hell, such as the River of Three Crossings and the Mountain of Needles, could be seen clearly, as if through a telescope. At that moment, the Buddha spotted the figure of a man named Kandata among the many sinners writhing at the bottom of hell. This Kandata was a great thief who had committed various evil deeds, such as killing people and setting houses on fire. However, Kandata had one memory of a good deed he had done. One day, while walking through a deep forest, he saw a small spider crawling along the edge of the path. Kandata raised his foot to crush the spider, but then thought, no, even though it is small, it has life. It would be cruel to take it without reason, and spared the spider. As Buddha looked upon the scene in hell, he recalled how Kandata had saved the spider. And he decided to save Kandata from hell as a reward for that single good deed. Just then, he looked nearby and saw a spider from the Pure Land on a lotus leaf, spinning a beautiful silver thread. The Buddha gently took the spider's thread in his hand and let it hang straight down from the white lotus flowers to the bottom of hell. At the bottom of the blood pool in hell, Kandata was suffering alongside other sinners, floating and sinking. Hell was pitch black, with only the needles on the mountain of needles glowing. The surroundings were as quiet as a grave, with only the faint cries of the sinners audible. Among them, Kandata was choking on blood, struggling like a dying frog. One day, Kandata suddenly raised his head and looked up at the sky. In the darkness, he noticed a single silver spider's thread descending from heaven, gently lowering itself toward him. Kandata flapped his hands in joy. If I cling to this thread and climb up, I might escape from hell. If I'm lucky, I might even reach paradise, he thought. He grasped the spider's thread tightly with both hands and began climbing upward with all his strength. However, the distance between hell and paradise was countless miles, so he could not reach the top immediately. After climbing for a while, Kandata became exhausted and decided to take a break. Hanging from the thread, he looked down below. The pool of blood where he had been was now hidden in the darkness below, and the mountain of needles had receded far below his feet. Kandata thought, if I keep climbing, I might be able to escape hell, and smiled as he clung to the thread. At that moment, he noticed something. Below the spider's thread, many other sinners were following him, climbing up like a line of ants. Kandata was shocked and terrified. This thin spider's thread is dangerous even for one person, let alone many people. It might break if too many climb on it. He shouted loudly, "Hey! This is my thread. Who gave you permission to climb up here? Get down, get down!" At that moment, the thread snapped with a sharp sound where Kanda was hanging. Before he could even scream, he was swept away by the wind, spinning wildly, and plummeted back into the darkness below. All that remained was the spider's thread of paradise, glistening briefly in the moonless, starless sky. The Buddha stood by the lotus pond in the Pure Land, watching the entire scene unfold. When he saw Kandata sink to the bottom of the blood-filled pool, the Buddha looked sad and slowly began to walk away. The coldness of Kandata's heart, who had tried to escape hell alone, and the inevitable consequence of that cruel heart. That must have seemed pitiful to the Buddha. However, the lotus flowers of the Pure Land paid no heed to such matters. The white, pearl-like flowers swayed gently at the Buddha's feet, and a fragrant scent continued to waft endlessly from their golden stamens. Perhaps it was nearing noon in the Pure Land. Once upon a time, there was an old man who lived in the mountains. He made a living by cutting bamboo in the mountains and fields. He used bamboo for all sorts of things. The old man's name was Sanuki. One day, while he was cutting bamboo, he found a single bamboo stalk that was glowing. "This is strange," he thought, and as he approached the bamboo, he saw that it was glowing from within. Looking inside, he saw a very beautiful little girl about 3 centimeters tall sitting there. The old man said, "I look at the bamboo every morning and evening. This child must have come to us. She must be our child." Saying this, the old man gently took the child in his hands and brought her home. He then entrusted the child to his wife, the old woman, and decided to raise her with care. The child was very beautiful and adorable, so the old woman placed her in a small basket and raised her with great care. After grandfathering the child, every time he cut the bamboo, money mysteriously began to appear from inside it. Thanks to this, the old man's house gradually became wealthy. The child grew up healthily. After about 3 months, she had grown so much that she looked like a proper adult. Grandfather and his wife held a hair dyeing ceremony and dressed the child in adult attire to celebrate. From then on, they kept the child hidden inside the house and raised him with great care. The child's face was so beautiful it seemed otherworldly. The house was always bright, as if filled with light. Even when grandfather was feeling unwell, seeing the child's face would restore his energy. His irritable mood would also calm down. Grandfather became skilled at cutting bamboo and grew into a strong and respectable man. The child also grew larger and larger. So, grandfather called Akita-san and asked him to name the child. Akita-san named the child Kaguya-hime. After giving her the name, grandfather's family held a 3-day celebration. They had many games and performances, invited both men and women, and celebrated joyfully and lively. The rumor that Princess Kaguya was extremely beautiful spread in no time. Rich people, important people, and ordinary people alike all began to think, "I must find a way to meet Princess Kaguya and I want to marry her." Many people gathered near the house where Princess Kaguya lived. They stayed up all night, wandering around the house even in the pitch dark, and some even tried to peek inside through the cracks. However, no matter how much they begged, Princess Kaguya would not see anyone. Even when they spoke to the people of the house, they did not receive a reply. Still, those who could not give up came every day and waited in front of the house from morning till night. Some people thought, "This is pointless. Let's give up and stop coming." However, 5 noble men did not give up. The 5 were Stone Prince, Carriage Prince, Abe the Right Minister, Otomo the Grand Counselor, Iso the Middle Counselor. These 5 men were so captivated by Princess Kaguya's beauty that they couldn't eat. They wrote letters to her, but she never replied. They sent poems, but she did not respond. Despite this, the 5 men continued to visit Princess Kaguya's house every day, regardless of the cold winters or hot summers. One day, one of the 5 men knelt down before grandfather and pleaded, "Please let me marry Kaguya-hime." Grandfather said, "This child is not my biological daughter, so I cannot decide on my own." Despite this, the 5 men did not give up. They returned home and prayed at the temple, making wishes. Grandfather grew increasingly worried and told Princess Kaguya, "Kaguya-hime, you are a person with special powers, but I have raised you as my own daughter. I am now over 70 years old and do not know how much longer I have to live. People usually marry, have children, and form families. Perhaps it's time for you to meet someone as well." Princess Kaguya replied, "I was raised as your daughter. I consider you my real father. So I will obey your wishes." Grandfather was overjoyed. "Thank you for saying that. It would be pitiful for you to remain unmarried. Go meet each of the 5 men who have waited for you all this time." But Princess Kaguya thought for a moment and said, "I don't know how seriously the 5 men feel about me. They might have fallen in love with me just because of my appearance, or they might change their minds quickly. So, I want to choose the person who brought me the item I requested as the strongest-hearted one." Grandfather was surprised but thought it was a good idea and told the 5 men. Princess Kaguya told each of the 5 men. To the stone prince she said, "Please bring me a stone bowl said to be from the land of Buddha." To the carriage prince she said, "Please bring me a branch from the tree of Mount Aurao in the eastern sea. That tree has silver roots, gold stems, and white jewel-like fruits." To Abe the right minister she said, "Please bring me a coat made from the skin of a fire rat that is said to live in China." To Otomo the grand counselor she said, "Please bring me the 5-colored jewel that shines on the neck of a dragon." To Iso the middle counselor she said, "Please bring me one of the child-safe shells found in a swallow's nest." Grandfather said, "These are very difficult requests. These are things that don't exist in this country." But Princess Kaguya smiled and replied, "Is it really that difficult? If you truly care about me, I'm sure you can bring them." Grandfather said, "All right, I'll tell them," and relayed the requests to the 5 men. The 5 men were surprised, saying, "We didn't think you'd ask for such difficult things." But after hearing each request, they reluctantly returned home. Stone Prince could not forget Princess Kaguya. He even thought, "If I cannot see Kaguya-hime, there is no meaning in living." He thought, "No one can bring a stone bowl from Buddha in India. But if that is what Kaguya-hime wants, I will do whatever it takes to pretend I brought it." Stone Prince was very intelligent and good at making plans. He told Princess Kaguya, "Starting today, I will go to India and search for a stone bowl." Then, he disappeared for 3 years. But in reality, he stayed in Japan and went to a temple in a place called Tochi in Nara Prefecture. There, he found an old, sooty black bowl that belonged to one of Buddha's disciples. Stone Prince secretly took the pot, put it in a beautiful cloth bag, decorated it with flower branches, and brought it to Princess Kaguya's house. Princess Kaguya was surprised. "Is this real?" she wondered, and looked inside the pot. There was a letter inside. The letter contained the following poem: "I searched with all my heart, crossing in pains and seas. This stone pot holds my tears." However, Princess Kaguya took the pot in her hands and said, "It doesn't glow. I thought it might at least shine like a firefly." She then composed a reply poem, "Not even the light of dew can be seen. Did you go all the way to Ogura Mountain for this?" Princess Kaguya threw the pot outside the gate and did not send a reply. Stone Prince was deeply disappointed, unable to receive a reply from Princess Kaguya, and returned home dejected. At that moment, he recited another poem: "If I were to meet you, who are like a white mountain, perhaps the light of the bowl would fade away." Even if I had discarded the bowl, I wanted to believe in you." However, Princess Kaguya did not respond to this poem either. No matter how he spoke to her, she would not listen. Stone Prince returned home with a heavy heart, his feelings unreciprocated. Carriage Prince couldn't give up on Princess Kaguya. "I can't find the real Mount Aurao, but maybe I can get her if I trick her," he thought. So the prince told his servant, "I'm going to Kyushu to rest," and told Princess Kaguya, "The prince has set out to find the branch of jade said to be on Mount Horai in the east." After leaving under the pretense of a journey, the prince built a secret house surrounded by 3 walls in a secluded location. There, he gathered 6 craftsmen and had them create a branch adorned with gold, silver, and jewels exactly as Princess Kaguya had desired. It was exquisitely crafted and beautiful. The prince placed it in a beautiful box, pretended to have returned from his journey, and returned to the capital. He then pretended to be weak and lay down on the bed, saying, "This is the branch of jade I risked my life to find," and showed it to Princess Kaguya. Attached to the branch was this poem, "I risked my life to find this. If I couldn't obtain it, I had no intention of returning alive." Princess Kaguya was moved by its beauty. This might really be a branch from Mount Horai, she thought, moved to tears. But just then, a man arrived at Princess Kaguya's house with a letter. The man said, "We are the craftsmen who made this jade branch. We worked hard for over 1,000 days to make it for the prince. But we haven't been paid yet. Please give us our wages." This revealed the prince's lie. Princess Kaguya was shocked. "I thought it was real, but how could you tell such an obvious lie?" She returned the poem and the jade branch. "I thought it was real, but when I looked closely, it was just a fake branch decorated with words." The prince's face turned bright red, and he left the house in embarrassment. Later, Princess Kaguya thanked the craftsmen who made the jade branch and gave them many gifts. However, the angry prince attacked the craftsmen on his way home, took back the gifts they had given him, and the craftsmen fled for their lives. The prince then said, "Not only was I rejected by a woman, but I was also mocked by the entire realm. There is no greater shame than this." And so, he retreated alone into the depths of the mountains. He never saw anyone again, and no one knows what became of him. Abe the Right Minister was a wealthy and powerful minister who lived in a large house. He could not give up his desire to marry Princess Kaguya, so he wrote a letter to a man named Aokai who lived overseas. The letter read as follows: "I have heard that there is a garment made from the skin of a fire rat. Please purchase it and send it to me." Abe the Right Minister selected a trustworthy servant from among his retainers, named him Ono, and sent him to China with the letter and money. The reply from Aokai read as follows: "I have never seen a fire rat skin garment in China. It exists in old tales, but I do not know if it is real. However, if I find one, I will purchase it and send it to you. If I cannot find one, I will return the money." Eventually, the ship returned from China, and Ono came back. Abe the Right Minister went to greet him joyfully and saw the box containing the fire rat skin garment. The box was beautifully decorated, and the garment was blue with a golden sheen, very beautiful. The letter read, "This garment was brought here long ago by a wise monk from India. I heard it was at a temple in the western mountains and bought it. It is a very rare item, so the price is 50 gold coins. If you do not like it, please return the clothes." Abe the Right Minister was overjoyed and bowed his hands toward China. "This must be the treasure that Kaguya Hime desired," he thought to himself. Abe the Right Minister placed the clothes in a box, decorated it with beautiful branches, and visited Princess Kaguya's house dressed as if he had just returned from a journey. A poem was also included. This garment, which burns my heart with endless longing, I wish you would wear today." Princess Kaguya looked at the garment and said, "It's a very beautiful garment. But I don't know if it's real." Grandfather said, "This is a very rare garment. Whether it's real or not, please accept it first. It would be a pity for Abe the Right Minister." Then he invited Abe the Right Minister into the house. Grandfather thought, perhaps this time we can finally marry. But Princess Kaguya said, "If this garment doesn't burn when put into the fire, then it must be genuine. May I try?" Grandfather thought, that's a fair test, and told Abe the Right Minister. Abe the Right Minister said, "This is a rare item that can't even be found in China. But if you must doubt it, please feel free to test it by putting it in the fire." So they put the clothes in the fire, and they burned fiercely. Princess Kaguya, though surprised, said, "It was fake after all," and returned the poem. "If it burns so easily, I shouldn't have hoped for anything in the first place." Abe the Right Minister was shocked and returned home. Otomo the Grand Counselor gathered many of his retainers and said, "It is said that there is a jewel that shines in 5 colors on the head of a dragon. Whoever brings it to me will have any wish granted." The retainers replied, "Your words are most gracious, but such a jewel is not something that can be easily obtained. Besides, it is said to be on the head of a dragon. How are we supposed to get it?" However, the Grand Counselor grew angry and said, "You are my vassals. You must fulfill my orders, even at the cost of your lives. This jewel is not from a foreign land. Dragons rise and descend from the mountains and seas of this country. Therefore, it must be somewhere in Japan." The vassals reluctantly replied, "And we will go and search as you command." Thus, the Grand Counselor ordered his retainers to take money, cloth, food, and other items from his house and go in search of the jewel. "If you cannot bring back the jewel, do not return home," he said. However, the retainers thought to themselves, "Why would he order us to do such a ridiculous thing?" Eventually, some of the retainers ran away with the money and goods and hid, while others went off to play wherever they pleased. Meanwhile, the Grand Counselor began building a magnificent house, saying, "It is to welcome Kaguya home." The roof was decorated with colorful threads, and the interior was filled with gold and silver ornaments and luxurious fabrics. Even his former wives left him, but the Grand Counselor was satisfied, saying, "It's okay because I'm going to marry Kaguya home." When his retainers did not return, the Grand Counselor finally decided to go in search of the dragon's jewel himself. "With the power of my bow, I can defeat a dragon with a single blow," he said confidently, and set out to sea with 2 retainers. But one day, the weather suddenly turned bad, and a fierce storm came. The wind was strong, lightning flashed, and the ship seemed about to sink into the sea. The ship's oarsman cried out, "I've never seen such a storm. This might be the dragon's anger. The gods are angry because the Grand Counselor tried to kill the dragon. Please apologize quickly." The Grand Counselor panicked and said, "I'm truly sorry. I won't do anything add to the dragon anymore. I won't even touch a single hair. Please save us." After praying to the gods repeatedly, the storm gradually subsided. A few days later, the Grand Counselor's ship was carried by the wind and arrived at Akashi. The Grand Counselor was exhausted and collapsed. When people rushed to help him off the ship, they saw that his face was swollen like to plums, and his stomach was bloated. Those who saw him couldn't help but laugh. Then, the retainers who had left and gone missing returned. "We couldn't find the jewel, so we couldn't return to the mansion," they apologized. The Grand Counselor, angered, replied, "Well, it was actually for the best that you couldn't retrieve the jewel. If you had truly taken the dragon's jewel, I would have certainly lost my life. I will never approach Kaguya hime again." and do not come near my house either." Saying this, he distributed the remaining items in the house among his retainers and drove them out. The once magnificent house now stands abandoned, having become a nest for birds. Iso, the middle counselor, said to his retainers, "If you find a swallow building a nest, let me know." The retainers asked, "Why?" The middle counselor replied, "I want to obtain the child shell that Kaguya-hime mentioned, which is said to be inside a swallow's nest." But the retainers said, "We have seen many swallows, but we have never seen a child shell inside one. Besides, they fly away as soon as they sense a human presence." Someone suggested, "There are many swallows nesting on the roof of the building where the government's rice is cooked. If we send someone skilled up there to watch, we might be able to get it." The middle counselor heard this and was very pleased. "That's an interesting idea. Let's try it right away." The middle counselor sent 20 men up to the attic of the building to observe the swallows. However, there were so many people that the swallows wouldn't come near them. When the middle counselor heard this, he was disappointed and wondered what to do. Just then, an old man from the government office named Kuratsu came and said, "That won't work. With so many people around, the swallows will be scared and won't come back to their nests." He then proposed, "Let's break the boards in the attic, put one person in a cage, and hang it up there. Then, wait quietly for the swallows to come, and when they lay their eggs, have someone take the eggs." The middle counselor was delighted and immediately sent the men away. He went to the site himself to observe the situation. Kuratsu explained further, "When swallows lay eggs, they raise their tails and circle 7 times before dropping them. If you watch for that moment and quickly reach out your hand, you might be able to catch the child shell." The middle counselor was very pleased with this idea and rewarded Kuratsu generously. One day, a swallow really came to the nest, raised its tail, and began to circle around. So, they put a man in a basket, hoisted him up, and had him search inside the nest. However, he reported, "There's nothing there." The middle counselor angrily said, "You're no good. I'll do it myself." He climbed into the basket, had himself hoisted up to the attic, reached out his hand, and felt something. "I've got it. It must be the child's shell. Lower me down quickly," he shouted. But suddenly, the rope snapped, and the middle counselor fell backward onto the edge of an iron pot below. People rushed over, gave him water to drink, and managed to revive him. "Show us what you're holding," the retainers demanded. When he opened his hands, what was there was not the child shell, but an old swallow's droppings. The middle counselor said, "What a foolish thing to do." The middle counselor was left unable to move due to his injuries. Though it was a humorous failure, the fact that people were talking about it was more embarrassing than anything else. Upon hearing this, Princess Kaguya sent a poem. "For many years, the sea at Sumishio has been calm. Is it true that no messenger has come?" Upon reading this, the middle counselor, trembling in his sickbed, wrote a reply. As he finished writing, he lost his strength and passed away. Princess Kaguya heard this and felt a little sad. The emperor heard rumors that Princess Kaguya was exceptionally beautiful and became curious. He ordered Fusa, a lady-in-waiting who served in the palace, to investigate. "There is a girl named Kaguya-hime who is said to be captivating men. I want you to go and see what kind of woman she is." Fusa obeyed the order and visited the home of the old man who lived in the bamboo grove. She greeted him politely and said, "I have come on the emperor's orders to see Kaguya-hime." The woman of the house then told Princess Kaguya, "The emperor's messenger has arrived. Please show him your face." However, Princess Kaguya refused, saying, "I am not beautiful. Why must I show my face to others?" The woman tried to persuade her, saying, "We cannot ignore the emperor's messenger. But Princess Kaguya replied, "I have no desire to serve the emperor. If you force me to serve him, I will vanish from this world." She refused to show her face. Fusa returned reluctantly and reported this to the emperor. The emperor said, "So this was the heart that led her to toy with so many men," and temporarily gave up. However, the emperor could not shake his curiosity. He thought, "The old man's house is near the mountain. I will pretend to go hunting and sneak a peek." The emperor took his attendants and went hunting in the mountains, stopping by the old man's house. There sat a woman who was truly radiantly beautiful. The emperor thought, "This must be her," and tried to approach her. However, Princess Kaguya fled into the depths of the house. When the emperor grabbed her sleeve, Princess Kaguya hid her face. The emperor said, "I will take you back with me." But Princess Kaguya firmly refused, saying, "I am not a person of this country. I cannot serve the emperor." The emperor said, "Why do you say such a thing? I must take you with me," and had a carriage brought to the house. But Princess Kaguya suddenly vanished from the spot. She disappeared as swiftly as a shadow. The emperor was astonished and thought, "This woman is not an ordinary human being after all. Then I will not take you. Just show me your beautiful form once more." At his request, Princess Kaguya returned to her original form. The emperor was even more captivated by her beauty. He wanted to keep her with him and return home together, but it was not to be, and he returned to the palace with a heavy heart. As he departed, the emperor composed a poem. The pain of leaving and the lingering sorrow are all because of Kaguya Hime. In response, Princess Kaguya also recited a poem. "For me, who has spent many quiet years, a place as dazzling as the palace holds no meaning." The emperor read this poem and felt even more drawn to Princess Kaguya. From then on, he sent her letters every day, received replies, and continued exchanging poems with flowers and grasses attached. Princess Kaguya also wrote a reply. The two communicated their feelings through songs and letters. And then, one spring day about 3 years later, Princess Kaguya was looking at the moon and shedding tears. Every night, she would look at the moon and cry, as if remembering something. By July, Princess Kaguya seemed even sadder. The people around her were worried and asked her, "What's wrong?" But she wouldn't say anything. On August 15th, on a particularly beautiful night when the moon was shining brightly, Princess Kaguya finally spoke through her tears. "I am from the Moon Palace. I came to Earth temporarily due to an ancient promise. However, the time of that promise has come to an end. Soon, someone will come to take me back to the moon, and I must return." Grandfather, who had raised her, was shocked and said, "I can't believe that. I raised you from when you were a baby. Why must you return to the moon?" Princess Kaguya replied, "I find it painful to part with my family on Earth. But there is nothing I can do about it." The emperor heard this and sent a large number of soldiers to protect Princess Kaguya. Soldiers surrounded the house to prevent the moon's messengers from coming from the sky. However, on the night of August 15, the sky brightened, and people from the moon's capital arrived on clouds. The soldiers were overwhelmed by the light and could do nothing. The moon's messenger said Kaguya Hime came to Earth temporarily to atone for her sins. Now, her time has come to an end. We have come to take her back. Princess Kaguya wrote a farewell letter to grandfather and put on the heavenly robe. As she put on the robe, all the sadness and memories of her time on Earth vanished. Then, Princess Kaguya rode the clouds back to the Moon Palace. The emperor, upon seeing the letter and the elixir of immortality left by Princess Kaguya, was deeply saddened. "If drinking this won't allow me to meet Kaguya Hime again, then I don't want the elixir," he thought, and ordered that the elixir and the letter be burned at the summit of Mount Fuji. Since then, That mountain has been called Fuji, and it is said that smoke still rises into the sky to this day.